Hey everyone, this is Will H. the Cinephile, and I just want to say welcome back to my channel. And this video, today, I'm gonna be diving into Christopher Nolan's conclusion to the Dark Knight trilogy. I have to admit, this is by far the toughest review I've ever had to do. Like, it's been a real challenge to articulate my thoughts on this film, and honestly, it took me like 3 to 4 hours just to finish watching it. Like, now I've seen The Dark Knight Rises a few times over the years, but each time I've struggled with it. Like, it feels when I was younger, it felt too long, too vivid, and at times even a bit boring. But as I've gotten older, like even when I watched it older, I've come to understand it more. But deep down, but deep down, I just want to say that it's hard to shake the comparison to The Dark Knight, which for me is a more compelling film. But I have to admit that it's not entirely fair to compare the two. Like 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 that. Like, what's fascinating about this trilogy is that Batman Begins is a traditional superhero origin story, while The Dark Knight takes on the feel of an action crime thriller, exploring the fine lines between heroes and villains, excuse me, while injecting plenty of philosophical depth. Then you have The Dark Knight Rises, which feels more like a straightforward superhero action flick. Like, what I find interesting is how the script came together. Like, Nolan wrote it with his brother Jonathan alongside David S. Goyer, the collaborator who helped launch the trilogy. Like, I'll be honest, and I will say this again, this review is tough, and I kept reminding myself not to unfairly compare this to The Dark Knight. In fact, I had to pause the movie like a couple of times, I especially paused during the scene where Bane breaks Batman's back. But I pushed on and eventually watched the whole thing through. Now I'm ready to explain what I think about it, so let's get into it. This one's been a challenge, but I'm excited to share my thoughts with you all. So let's get busy. So I would just say that, like I said before, it took me nearly 3 to 4 hours to finish The Dark Knight Rises. Why? Because I kept pausing. Like, I paused after the first 31 minutes, did some research, and watched the interviews with Christopher Nolan to understand why he wanted to make this film, and whether he even wanted to make it at all. The answers, however, weren't clear to me, so that's when I called my man, my cousin, Justin, who shed light on the situation and opened my eyes to something I hadn't fully considered thinking. This movie was meant for Heath Ledger to return. And and if Ledger hadn't tragically passed away, may you rest in peace, good sir, Nolan would have created something even more grander, more captivating, and more ambition. Like, after Justin explained this to me, I began to imagine what could have been a more powerful and fitting conclusion to Nolan's Batman trilogy. Like, instead, we were left with The Dark Knight Rises, a film that feels less like a triumphant finale and more like a film that struggles to fill the void left by Ledger's absence. Like like The Dark Knight Rises is a movie that falters in its narrative. Despite a strong cast and some fantastic sequences, Bane, as portrayed by Tom Hardy, is an intriguing villain, but honestly, I could barely understand most of what the fuck he was saying. Like, I didn't even know what the hell he was saying most of the time. But and while Christian Bale remains an excellent Batman as always, Anne Hathaway's take on Catwoman, Selina Kyle, left me cold. Like, to me, she didn't embody the raw vulnerability or the dangerous allure that the character needs. Like, Hathaway, don't get me wrong, Hathaway is a talented actress, but I feel this was one of Nolan's weaker casting choices in my eyes. Like, she didn't just quite pull off the multifaceted depth that Catwoman demands. But on a technical side, Nolan's use of practical effects is impeccable as always. Like, the opening plane hijack sequence is a masterclass in filmmaking. Like, it was so jaw-dropping, and its realism and execution, and it set a high bar for the rest of the movie. Even the stadium sequence with the haunting performance of the Star Spangled Banner by a young boy before Bane unleashes the chaos, like, is another visual standout. Like, Nolan excels at creating these visceral, memorable moments, but they are ultimately overshadowed by the film's lackluster narrative. Like, I can't help but feel that if Ledger had been alive to reprise his role as the Joker, the film would have been a much more grander spectacle. Like, the absence of the Joker leaves a gaping hole, like, and the shift in thematic focus feels disconnected, in my opinion. Like, The Dark Knight was layered with psychological thriller about the eternal struggle between heroes and villains, while The Dark Knight Rises feels more like a conventional action film with superhero elements. Like, it doesn't have the same punch and the same philosophical depth or the same emotional stakes. Like, it's as if Nolan tried to fill the void with action and spectacle, but it just doesn't land in the same way. Like, deep down, like, in many ways the film feels like a burden Nolan had to get off his chest. Like, that's the way I see the film. Like, he had to conclude Bruce Wayne's story arc, whether in a way, like, he had to conclude it whether he wanted to or not. Like, despite the loss of Ledger, Nolan felt the weight of responsibility to finish the trilogy. Like, while I respect that he pushed forward, the film's heart just isn't the same place as The Dark Knight. Like, the emotional weight of Bruce's arc, particularly his relationship with Alfred, is undeniably powerful. Like, their farewell is raw, heartbreaking, and beautifully performed, but it just doesn't make up for the film's shortcomings. Like, if I'm being completely honest, The Dark Knight Rises is the most underwhelming, forgettable film in Christopher Nolan's filmography. Yes, that might be a controversial opinion, but it is my truth, and it is to me the weakest Batman film and the weakest conclusion to a trilogy ever made. And yes, it even ranks below Insomnia, which for me was a much more engaging film in terms of character development and narrative focus. But ultimately, I just feel like The Dark Knight Rises exists more as a means to tie up the loose ends rather than to deliver a true spectacular conclusion to the trilogy. Like, Nolan's struggle with Ledger's absence is evident, and while he gave us a conclusion to Bruce's journey, it feels like a hollow one. Had Ledger been alive, the film would have been more than just a satisfying conclusion. It would have been a landmark in filmmaking. Like, the change in thematic direction is jarring. Like, while The Dark Knight was a complex crime thriller, The Dark Knight Rises is more of a traditional superhero action flick. Like, the two scripts are so differently are so written differently, and in hindsight it's clear that Nolan was trying to capture lightning in a bottle twice. If he had found a way to blend the intensity and depth of The Dark Knight with the action heavy approach of The Dark Knight Rises, perhaps we would have gotten something truly unforgettable. But who knows? But in conclusion, I respect Christopher Nolan's vision, and I always will, and I admire the ambition behind this trilogy. He worked hard to conclude Bruce Wayne's story in a way that felt right for him, but deep down, I feel like that The Dark Knight Rises was more about closure than it was about offering an exhilarating finale. Like, it's one of those movies that gets the job done, but it doesn't leave you in awe. Like, it's a film that, despite its moments of brilliance, it's overshadowed by its predecessor. Like, Nolan gave us a conclusion, but it was a conclusion that felt more out of obligation than inspiration. And this film will always carry the burden of being the final chapter in a trilogy that could have been one of the best of all time. Had, like I said before, had Ledger lived, the film would have been different, grander, more intense, and far more captivating. Unfortunately, we what we got was a film that, while ambitious and occasionally breathtaking, never quite matches the heights of The Dark Knight or any other Christopher Nolan movie. And yes, so as you all see, like it's been difficult and it's been hard for me to articulate my thoughts because I compare it to The Dark Knight, but deep down I felt like I had to compare it, even though it may not be fair, but I had to get this out of the way and express why I am the way I am towards The Dark Knight Rises, like that. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and I hope you respect my opinion, and I hope it was informative. But I just want to say that make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and also check out my Letterboxd account. And and I'll see you in my next video, my fellow cinephiles. I see you. I'll see you. I'll see you around.